Welcome. In this video, we're going to take a look at the cutter and auto patch and cross-cutting and how we can use all of these features when it comes to building a rig character. So the first thing we want to do is understand a little bit about how the cutter works. So part of what needs to happen with this, we do need to make sure that we've gone into our preferences, which under Mac is under Harmony. On Windows, it will be Edit Preferences, and then under Advanced, we need to make sure that we have support underlay and overlay art layers because those will become useful as we work. Another option that is useful when we're doing these rig characters and we'll have lots of composites is to set our composite default as pass-through. This is how it calculates the blending of colors. So those are two options you do want to make sure that are checked. So if you see O, L, C, and U on the right-hand side, so these are going to be our 4 color layers. By default, it draws on the line layer. And it's going to be important that we separate our line art and our color art as we do this, so that we're able to get both the cutter and auto patch to function correctly. So if we want to have seamless joints on a cutout character rig, this is how we do it. So I'm going to grab my pencil. Now, one thing when we're working with the pencil for the line tool is it's able to get a cleaner, smoother line when we blend it. But what we will want to do is go into our pencil and make sure that we have set it so that the minimum size is 100%, so it's consistent with pencil line. Now, a lot of modern productions use very skinny pencil lines because then it's less obvious when they're not perfectly joined, because it doesn't really show unless you're in super high resolution or a character is really zoomed in. I'm using a fatter line to make it a little bit easier to see what's happening in the video. So first we're going to take a look at the cutter. So I'm just going to draw a basic shape. Now when we've drawn our shape and put our artwork on our line art layer, if we want to then put artwork on the color art layer, there's an easy way to do it. Now one is, we can fill this with the paint bucket right now, and I can choose a color and I can fill with the paint bucket and it fills that in. But my color is now on my line art layer. So something that you could do is you could cut that. Well, first we have to select it with the select tool. Then I can cut it, I can go to my color art layer and I can paste. Now, if we zoom in, we'll notice that it's putting that color shape exactly halfway across the line because our line is split down the middle. This is the path of the line that we drew, and the color is filling all the way to those edges. So if we go into our drawing and look here, and if we turn both on, we can go to the color art layer, line art, and we can start to see, if we click the eyeball, it shows all of the layers here that are part of it. So then we can select and see. So with that selected, we'll see how it lines up. So going back into my main layer here, this is now my back. That's not the best way to add our color art. So if I go back to my line art layer, with it selected, or immediately after I draw it, this icon on my toolbar up here, create color art from line art. That's easy. So now let's see, shift click gives me options here. Generally we don't need those, we just click on that button, it's added it. I can click now, so my color art is the active layer that I'm working on, grab my paint bucket and fill. So if I go into the drawing, we can see my color is on the color art, my line is on the line art. They are indeed separate. So that makes it easy to see. So when building production ready rigs, the color art is always going to be separated from the line art. Now I'm going to draw a second object here on a different layer. And for this one, I am going to use a separate stroke color. Generally, the stroke color is the same throughout a whole character, so then your lines blend a little bit more, but I am using a separate one so that we can better see how this is happening. So I've drawn that. I click the Create Color Art from Line Art, click over to my color art layer, grab my paint bucket, and now I can fill. I can again verify color art, line art, they are indeed separate. Okay, so this is the first step. Now the next thing we want to do is we're going to put pegs on things so that we can, of course, animate. That's the usual thing that you would do, so everything would have a peg. If I'm in my layer view, of course, I can just select both of these and click on the add peg icon. That adds a peg. We can also go into our node view. So I'm going to just make this section bigger and go into the node view, stretch my window over a little bit so I have some room to work. So in the node view, to separate everything to make it easy, I just click on a bottom node, click the order up button, it moves it up. Now we can see I have my two art nodes. Now I'm pulling these up because I know I'm going to need space underneath here in the basement before it goes into the main scene composite. I select both of these here, and we remember that the keyboard shortcut is Command or Control Shift P. That adds individual pegs for these. And with those two pegs selected, I will hit Command P or Control P to create a master peg to join them. So now if I use my transform tool, I can now just locate a master peg at the bottom, my front object here, I can put in the center, picturing in my head that maybe this is some type of eyeball. So we would now put something down at the bottom. So eyeball squishes and stretches, but the pupil and iris inside generally don't stretch from the bottom, but they'll stretch from their middle. So that's a common way of organizing that. So now I've set my pivot points. Now I can go and move it around as needed. So we've now configured this part here. So we have pegs above, we have our drawing layers, we'll have space underneath that we're going to add some additional nodes into. So one of the nodes that we'll work with is the cutter node. So if I hit the return or enter key in my keyboard, it pulls this up so I can look for what I'm looking, or I can choose a node, just start typing in. I'm looking for a cutter. So I start typing, there it is, it inserts a cutter. So the cutter is a mask. You can see we have this little mask icon here anyway. So what I can do is insert this. Now to insert into my connection node here, so on the cable that's connecting it, I hold down the Alt or Option key, drag, and we'll see how it connects into it. I can also disconnect, drag, and then reconnect. That's another way of working. And you'll see that so far nothing has changed. I put this here, but I haven't said what is the mask. So what I'm going to do is say I want this object here to be the mask. And now we see it went away. And you may be thinking, well, this isn't very useful. Now if I click on the peg for it and move, we'll see that there it is outside. Even though it's on top in the composite. So in theory, we should see it, but it's on top. Now this node, this cutter, if I look at it, we have an option to invert the cutter. Now if we invert the cutter, you'll see the little mask here, which is, the mask is white, the area around is black. If I click that button, you'll see how it flipped that. But more importantly, if we look over in our camera view, you'll see how we've now created a mask for this. So we can move this around, but it can't go beyond it. So if we imagine that this is an eye and I'm moving the eyeball, you can see how they're looking in all different directions. And that's working, except when we get at the edge. We got a little problem that our line isn't really showing up how we want. We want the outside line of this back object. Well, remembering that we have these art layers that are part of this, we can separate those out. And I can separate that out, so I'll hit return and I'm going to just type line, and that pulls up my line art. And if I drag from my art layer to line art and then put line art on top of the cutter, you will see that now the line art for this back layer is sitting on top of the front object, which is being masked or cut by the back object. So right away we can create complex visual elements just by simply isolating the line art and using the cutter. So if I hit return, you'll notice even in my node search under line art it says isolate. So part of what this does when we have these art layers is they isolate specific parts. We can do the color art, we'll be looking at auto patch in a little bit for joints, but we can use the cutter very effectively to isolate this and to create a mask for our animation purposes. So if you created say a wall with a window and you wanted to animate something outside the window, you could use it for that. But it's commonly used for eyes, it's used on mouths. Cutters are used extensively throughout a rigged character. Now it's time to take a look at using the auto patch. So to repeat some of what we've done to reinforce it, again, we do our lines with the pencil, make sure we're on the line art layer. It's really common as you work to sometimes accidentally choose the wrong layer. So I'm going to create my lower, and now I'm going to create my upper part for a limb. Now I can click add new artwork, go here, add new color, go grab my paint bucket, and I'm going to then on the lower go to my color art, fill, go up a layer, color art, fill, so they're now both filled. We can see that we have an ugly joint as part of this, but that's okay. We're going to take care of that here in a minute. So if I click on display, first I will order up to spread it out. I'm going to move my parts up as part of this. And one thing that we will notice is I have my main scene composite, and as I'm going to build this, I want this arm to have its own composite. So I'm just going to right now click, I've done a composite recently, so it's up near the top, so I'll just click on that. Now I have a composite. It added it in. We're back kind of in business. Now when I said the pass-through composite, you will notice that the original composite for my scene, I did not have that option selected, so it's rendering as a bitmap. The bottom one doesn't ever really matter which option we choose here, provided that's our final scene composite, but a bitmap comes out rectangular. Pass-through has this trapezoidal shape, so you can immediately tell when you look inside your node view, is it a pass-through or a bitmap. So in general, we set our composites as pass-throughs and only change it if certain compositing options require us to use a different mode for it. That's going to give the most predictable and best results as we work. So now, with my two layers, we'll repeat the process. Command-Control-Shift-P to give them pegs, and then with those two pegs selected, Command-Control-Shift or Command or Control P to get a master peg for them. Now I'm just going to set some pivot points here because as we add in the auto patch, we will be doing some simple animation to figure this out. And I realize the order here is off. I always like to have the upper on the bottom, the lower on the top. So we'll go like in a three-part, it'd be hand, lower arm, upper arm, or foot, lower leg, upper leg. So easy enough to switch here is we can just drag these over, drag that down, drag these back. Now if I do want to clean things up at all, I can just select, hit the order across so we can see that now, move things over. So now I have the upper arm and the peg, so that should be our correct limb orientation. I can set the shoulder movement there. So an auto patch is a good option, but it's limited. So if you can get away with just using an auto patch and not having to do anything else more complex, that's a great way to go. So to do that, I will make sure that my node window is the active one with the red frame on it. I'll hit return or enter, and now I will either type in, or mine's right there, and I'll get auto patch. Now if I take the upper arm, drag that to auto patch, drag that into the node, so I've sandwiched the lower arm between the auto patch and the upper arm, you will notice how the joint disappeared. So now if I grab my transform tool and animate, you can see we've created a seamless joint. So I can very easily move. Now you may notice it is important that we have to pay attention to the shape of the joint. This is why circle joints are really useful when we're doing cutout rigs, because then you don't get weird kind of extra pieces showing up. So this works, but it's not uncommon when you're working on a rig that you have to bring one part in front of another part, say the arm in front of the torso or behind the torso. Maybe the lower arm has to be behind and the upper arm has to be in front, or vice versa. So if I change these in that order, it's called nudging. And the trick for doing nudging is when we have our camera window active, we have the transform tool, the peg is selected, our camera window is active, I hold down Alt or Option, and I use the arrow key. So imagine we're looking at a top-down view. Up arrow moves it away from me, down arrow is going to pull it closer to me. So now if I do that, you can see that though I have an auto patch, it's not working. Now if you're puzzled and going, but I want to see, I need like more information on what's really happening there. And what we can do is if I right click in one of my toolbars where I have room on screen and choose coordinate, that will pull up my coordinates. So I have my XYZ positioning, I have my scale positioning, XYZ rotation. So now with this object selected, once again camera window is active. If I hold down Alt or Option and push the down arrow, we'll see it says 001F. So every coordinate, it's accurate to 1,000th of a pixel essentially, and I can move it forward. If I push the up arrow, it moves it back to 0. If I push the up arrow again, it's now B, meaning behind. So when I build artwork, essentially I can stack 1,000 things at 0, but they're all kind of stacked on top of each other. So then we have to start kind of moving them. Now what we don't see when we, hang on. What we don't see when we do this is we don't see, we moved it, and because it's moving so little, you don't actually see any change in artwork, but we're now moving it further behind, further forward. Now if you're pressing the keys and nothing's happening, So say your timeline is active and then you do Alt and the arrow keys, nothing. Remember, up arrow, down arrow. It has to be the camera view. And this is why it's really important to put focus on mouse enter. Choose that in your preferences so you see the red box around the camera. And now I can nudge it. And as I nudge it, you see how it breaks the auto patch. So this is why auto patch is good, but limited. And if we do more with this, we can then create a joint that survives nudging. Having made an auto patch limb, we're now going to create cross-cutting. So this is a limb that supports nudging, so I can move my nudging without breaking that joint. And again, we're just starting with the 2-part limb, and then we will create a 3-part, but the 3-part gets a little messier to look at, so this is why we're starting with the 2-part. And to do this, what we need are 2 more nodes as part of it. So I need to grab a line art node. So I can just start typing line art and grab that. And I'm going to need a color art node. So it's easy if you start typing the word color or the word art, and you get that. Now we also have the auto patch. If I hold down Alt or Option and drag, this pulls it out of it. I'm just going to pull these out for the moment. And what I want to do is rename these, because then they take up a little bit less space on my screen. So I will rename this CA for color art. And I will rename this LA for line art. And this will be, of course, AP for auto patch. So we've now renamed each of these. Now the order that I like to work with these is line art, auto patch, color art. I'm now going to remove all of these connections using my cable cutter. So those cables have been removed, and I'm going to want to position these 3 options here. So we have our line art, we have our auto patch, and I have my color art. What I want to do is also create a cutter, and I will then need an additional composite. So remembering, as we worked with a red character and each body part had a composite, so effectively this will be the arm composite, but when we start doing these blending options like this, it becomes necessary to have additional composites as part of it. So because I have the space here, I am going to just move all of this over, because it's going to make things a little bit easier to see. Now I need a copy of those 5 nodes here, so these are ones we can copy paste because they don't have any specific either positioning information like a peg or artwork like a drawing layer. So I can copy paste those, and I will position these over here, and I need my 2 cutters in the middle. So if I do this, let's make a little more room down here. We'll make a little more room down here, so it will be easier to follow our cables as we work with those. So first off, I'm going to just drag color art down to my composites, drag those composites into my limb composite here. So the non-pass-through, that is my scene composite, so all of this is now just part of that one grouping, that one limb. So we've brought those down, and I want to connect. Now a quick way to connect our artwork layer to these additional nodes is simply to click on it, and if I hold down Alt or Option, I can click on a node and it will connect it. Now if I hold down, click on that node, hold down Alt or Option, click, and it connects them. That, to me, that makes it easier than dragging from one port to something else. So now my line art, we drag the line art into the cutter because the line art is what we want to have cut, because we can see our color art lines up and that's beautiful. But now my line art, let's drag that down. And now if I drag my line art to this one down, and now we can see we're back to our original layout and problem where it's not working really well. Sorry, I forgot. My line art needs to go to the cutter. Cutter comes back into my composite for it. So now we don't have any cutting going on, and this is where we use the auto patch. So we're going to use the auto patch. Let's just move this over, scale it up a little bit more so it's easier to see. So as we take the auto patch is going to be our mask, and I can put that in. Whoop, doesn't need to mask itself, it needs to mask the other one. And this is why it's referred to as cross-cutting. You see how we've now crossed between them. So the auto patch of one cuts the line art of the other one. The auto patch of this one cuts the line art of that. Now we have a joint that if I click on the lower arm here and nudge it, so I can nudge it forward and it looks like it's on top anyway, and now I nudge it back, we don't get any breakage. Now let's try the upper arm. Nudge that forward, we nudge that back. So cross-cutting like this allows us to create a joint that will survive nudging. If you know the joint you're creating doesn't need that, then simply doing a basic auto patch, that's all you need. Don't overcomplicate what you're trying to do if you don't have to. But when we're trying to set this up so that we have the possibility of nudging, cross-cutting like this is going to work. And eventually we'll look at how we can take all of these nodes and composites with the different art layers, with our cutters, and our overlay layers. We'll even build more complex structures, and we can save that out in a group where we will just take and drag drag our different limbs into it, whether it's a 2-piece joint or a 3-piece limb, and drag in and make the connection so we don't have to recreate this for every body part every time, because that does get pretty ugly. But sometimes when we're trying to then connect a hip to the thigh or deal with shoulders and things like that, then it does get a little bit messy. So right now this is a 2-part limb, and again if I click on it, it's fully, I can animate it the same as I animated before, and I can nudge it, so I can nudge it behind or I can nudge it forward, and it doesn't break my scene. Alright, that was my upper. Oh, there's the one I want to delete, so I'm back to normal. So that's creating a 2-part limb. Most characters have 2 parts to their limb, and then they have an extremity, hand, foot, or claw, whatever it is. So I am going to just add in a basic hand, making sure I'm on the line art layer. I'll say make some color art, grab my paint bucket, grab my fill, click to the color art, fill, so now it's there. We can see that The hand is on top, so it's not where I need it yet, but easily fixed because we know how to move through the node view. So now I have another art layer as part of this, so we probably need to move things down here a little bit. And I'm going to disconnect that node off of it. And remembering that, again, I can now, actually we'll leave the node on. I'm going to get in my pegs, then I will add in all of my art layer nodes. So then we'll add in the peg for this, grab my advanced animation rotate tool, that connects it. Now the lower arm here, what we should do is now have another peg on it. So we'll insert the lower peg for that, connect that to the upper arm. So that lower peg should be here. Now ideally we would have set these two pegs at the same time. We could copy them information between them if we wanted to be a little bit more exacting with it, because that peg should probably be in the same location, the same way that this peg should be in the same. Those two should share the same location. But now we have our basic limb situated, so I can see how I can work with that. And now it's time to work on the art layers. Remembering once again that when we have layers without actual information in them, they're just isolation layers or utility layers. We can copy paste those with no issue, but copy pasting nodes or drawing layers causes challenges that we have to be very careful about. So I'll copy paste. And we got a bunch of nodes here, and we'll just get those mostly aligned. Now I can connect. Again, click on a node, hold down Alt or Option, and click, and now it attaches those nodes. And now I can take that and drag that down so the hand is attached. It's not being cut yet because the hand needs to be cut by the auto patch of the lower arm. And now that went away. So now that's good. If I go to the hand here, and now let's see if I nudge the hand. Oh, so we have a nudging issue here. So again, just doing the basic work with the cutter and the auto patch is not, it's pretty much the same as just the simple auto patch arm. Cross-cutting is where we're able to then allow for nudging. So to make that happen, I am going to just select these three composites and pull them down, because I know from experience that I'm going to want a little bit more space. And I'm going to just take all my cutters and pull those down a little bit more, because the same way that when we cross-cut for the upper and lower arm, we're only doing a single cut for the hand, so we need to cross-cut between the hand and the lower arm. So what that means is the hand's auto patch, which wasn't being used yet, if I put this over here, we see that the auto patch from the upper arm goes away. But now the hand is, click on its peg, so I can send it back and forth, so I can nudge it, and it works great. So we need to adjust that. And the way that we do that is by an additional composite. So that allows us to have both the auto patch from the upper arm and the auto patch from the hand. Both of those are going to be cutting the lower arm. So knowing that this is the middle piece, the lower arm is the middle piece, that's the middle piece between the hand and the upper arm. So we know that because that's the middle piece, it needs to be cut on both ends. Well, because my cutter can only take one, and I don't want to make two cutters and then run into layering issues and it'd be messy, The proper way is I now have this additional composite so that both go into it, and then that is what is cutting. So I'm just trying to come up with a way that we can follow all of these cable connections. You will notice that when you click on a node, we get these little dots. Those dots are waypoints, and I can use those to adjust the shape. So I can adjust the shape of these nodes here. So if I click here, or of these cables, so sometimes doing that is going to give me a little more visible options as to what is happening inside. So I will adjust that so I don't have cables wrapping over the top of each other and being uncertain as to what is actually affecting what. So we went from a basic cutter to an auto patch to a two-piece limb to a three-piece limb. And if you follow all of these cables and connecting it, so we have line art, auto patch, color art for each drawing layer, and we isolate them out, running them into cutters or just running them into additional composites, that allows us to then create. So this hand can animate. We can see how it works. If it was drawn with a better circle at the joint, we wouldn't get that little bubble at the end. Now I can move up, can adjust this. If I option behind, now the upper arm is in front, we can see it's in front. Now the lower arm's in front. If I go to just the hand, again, option behind, option in front, so we are able to move that. Oh, probably should have been using the transform tool. Now we'll see at this point the hand is, if I want the hand to be in front of the upper arm here, we probably need to nudge it. So I'll click on the hand and option, and now I need to hit the down arrow to start pulling it forward. So now you can see how it pulled it forward. Now we do run into some options where we're losing our line art when we're bringing the arm up this high, and eventually we will work with our overlay art layer to have additional control of that so it doesn't completely disappear on us like that. But for right now, this is enough to get started in your cross-cutting auto patch journey. Good luck and have fun animating.